So one of the most anticipated shows of the first part of the year has just been released, and it's safe to say that it was nothing short of an adventure. With action around every corner and the capturing of the Avatar on the Fire Nation's mind, we witnessed personal journeys amongst the characters whilst dealing with the enemy that was at hand. With an ending that was epic in scale, the hint of Sozin's Comet arriving in Season 2, and a battle that had game-changing results, let's jump into the ending and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is Avatar The Last Airbender ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The build up to the ending. Before we get into the ending, let's just delve into why it was that we were seeing the battle taking place at Aagna Quel'a in the final section. Within the first episode, we saw that Fire Lord Sozin wanted to disrupt balance that was present on the planet. Following there being no Avatar that was announced, he wanted to rule the planet himself and have each and every nation and species be isolated, rather than flow freely with one another. And that was something that he was successful in doing. He attacked the Airbenders and wiped out the entire race on the night that Aang went out into the ocean and got caught up in a storm. From there, he was frozen for 100 years, and then, when he awoke, he was the last of his kind, and the world was no longer free like it once was. It was under the reign and rule of the Firebenders, which acted in the name of the Fire Nation. With the awakening of the Avatar, Prince Zuko had a personal mission of capturing the Avatar, as that was the only remaining threat that was present that would prevent the Fire Nation from continuing their rule. So now, under the leadership of Fire Lord Ozai, he wanted to continue what was set up with Sozin all of those years ago. So with Aang being located at Aagna Quel'a right at the end and fighting to protect the Northern Water Tribe, that's why we saw the battle being brought to them there. Plus, we also knew that it was going to happen there as well because of the vision that was shown to Aang by Kyoshi when he met the former incarnation of the Avatar in their shrine. The ending explained. Despite the state of freedom being at stake throughout the entirety of this season, it very much felt like it was a deep dive inside the minds of all of the main characters in the show. For example, Aang's guilt of not being there 100 years ago when the Firebenders wiped out the Airbenders, and the fact that he was the Avatar but he didn't do his job to save the people when they needed him most was something that plagued his mind relentlessly. Plus, he was also going against the grain in not wanting to be alone like all other previous incarnations of the Avatars were. He had friends, he cared about them, and he knew that he was stronger with them by his side. Alongside that, we had Zuko's conflict within his mind over wanting to please his father in being this ruthless warrior that showed no compassion, but knowing that deep down inside of him, he wasn't that person at all. We had Katara, who was fighting against the barriers that were present, where she wasn't able to be a warrior due to being a woman, but was also learning how to be a master at waterbending. And finally, we had Sokka, who wanted to prove his dad wrong based on a memory where he said that he thought that he was weak, so he wanted to grow stronger. It was all of these complex issues that were going on inside of the characters' minds which led to the behaviours that we saw during the climax of the finale. Zhao had been secretly working with Zuko's sister, Azula, in getting information relayed to him about everything that was going on. She was a fierce warrior and wanted to prove to her father that she should be the rightful heir as the Fire Lord over her brother. Both Zuko and Zhao wanted the Avatar for different reasons. Zhao wanted to prove his worth to the Fire Lord and go down in history. And Zuko wanted to prove to his father that he wasn't the weak individual that he thought that he was when he banished him 3 years prior to the time that it set in. However, with Zuko breaking the Avatar out of Zhao's capture, he viewed him as a traitor, and he tried to have him killed, something which he thought was successful, but it wasn't. Zhao had the intention of destroying an entire species, which was the Waterbender, which was only possible if he destroyed the moon. On the specific day that they were attacking the Northern Water Tribe, it was the day where the spirits appeared in the physical world. And if he found the spirit of the moon and destroyed it, then it would essentially mean that waterbenders would cease to exist, because in order for them to be able to utilize their abilities, they draw their power from the ocean and the moon combined together. Zhao was actually successful in doing that, as he killed the spirit, and that then meant that Aang had to do what all previous incarnations of Avatars were saying to him, when they were reinforcing the fact that he had to put the role of Avatar above his own life and people that he cared for, because he'd eventually be faced with a time where he'd need to give his life, and that was the case in this instance. Aang always thought that he'd be able to protect the world with his friends, but with the moon being destroyed, it meant that the waterbenders were powerless, so Aang did what previous incarnations said. He put the protection of the waterbenders over his own life, and he gave himself to the spirit of the ocean, which caused rage and wrath to be channeled, which allowed him to destroy the firebenders that were wreaking havoc on Aagna Quel'a. However, with Princess Yui being touched by the moon spirit when she was younger, when she was sick, she felt as though it was now her time to give something back, which was her life. This meant that she then turned into the spirit, and the moon returned to the sky, allowing all of the waterbenders' powers to return. Even though Aang saved the day, he still felt guilt inside of him because he felt as though if he didn't go up into the sky 100 years ago, then all of the people that died in the Battle of Aagna Quel'a wouldn't have lost their lives, because the Fire Nation wouldn't exist in its ruling force that it did now. During the closing moments of the episode, we saw that Zhao was killed, but before he died, he said that Zuko's mission only existed because Ozai wanted to use it to fire up Zuko's sister to get a sense of hunger for power and dominance. Something which was actually the case, as Zuko failed the mission and rode off saying that he was tired. Yet with regards to his sister, she was successful in taking Omashu for the first time in history, showing just how much of a terrorizing warrior she was. So that's something that will most likely be getting explored more in the next season. Ozai also had a little sneaky tactic like his ancestor Sozin did. Like how Sozin devised plans for an attack that didn't end up happening, which then allowed him to attack the airbenders in surprise. This was also the case with Aagna Quel'a. They attacked Aagna Quel'a so that he could actually move in on Omashu in a surprise attack, so it did end up working. Aang said how he was looking forward to going back there when he'd need to learn earthbending, but he's going to be in for a shock for sure. The last thing that we saw in the episode was Ozai mentioning how it was almost time for Sozin's comet to pass. This is something which passes the planet every 100 years, and it allows firebenders to harness the power of the passing comet, which increases the strength of their powers by quite a lot. It's said to give firebenders the powers of 100 suns. They were strong enough in this season without it, let alone with the power of 100 suns behind them. Overall review. Personally, I thought this show was just okay. It wasn't as complex as I thought it was going to be, and it all just felt a little bit purposeless. I thought we were going to be seeing Aang going on a journey of mastering the other elements, but we spent 8 hours with him and he didn't master anything else. It felt like a show that was made up of side quests, if I'm being honest. Even the final episode with the battle, it kind of felt like a side quest too, because at that point it seemed like Zhao didn't even want the Avatar. He cared more about wiping out the waterbenders, so the lack of scale did feel quite prominent in the show. I'm not even lying when I say this as well, but I think the first episode was actually my favourite. I thought the performances were really good in that episode. The effects were really good, probably the most we had in a runtime, and I like the setting up of the story. I would say that episode 5 and 6 did feel like a bit of a drag to me. This was when they were in the spirit world, something which did have importance during the finale, but I don't know. It just didn't feel that gripping in the moment. I would say though, I loved the way that Ko was depicted. They were so haunting, menacing, and frightening to listen to and see. To the point where I'd have actually liked to have seen more of them, to be honest, because they were one of my favourite things in the entire season. In terms of the performances, I thought it was a mixed bag. Some were pretty good, in fact most of them were, but there was just the odd occasion amongst most characters where the lines just felt quite poorly delivered and some body movements and interactions just looked really forced and fake. I don't know if that's due to the direction or just the way that the dialogue was written, probably a combination of both, but that was something which just stuck with me. One of my favourite characters was Iroh. Despite being a firebender and being the brother of the Fire Lord, he had compassion and didn't use violence just because he could. The loss of his son was something which changed him, and seeing him forge an almost father and son relationship with Zuko was one of the best things that I took away from the show. They cared for one another like no other, and it was made most clear when Zuko had the opportunity to take the Avatar whilst in prison or go after his uncle, and he chose to rescue him. I've not seen the other iterations of Avatar, so I can't really give a comparison on the films with the TV show. Not yet, anyway. But I would say that it was a fun ride. It just felt like there was never really that much at stake or much justification or motivation for it to be like that. I'd recommend giving the show a watch for sure. It's fun, full of some good choreographed fight scenes, but the acting is just very average and it's not that serious. That's how I'd probably describe it. Throw it on if you're just gonna chill. So, there you have it. Avatar The Last Airbender ending explained.